The priority for stakeholders in a for-profit business is ultimately, look, at the end of the day, it's about making money. Money for the shareholders, money for the directors or whoever it is that has a financial vested interest in a company, and obviously to create sustainable employment and to be able to pay what would be healthy wages to the people who work for the organisation. Now, of course, that's not an end in itself. It is important, but it's important because what it's really about doing is creating quality of life. And so there's 4 areas that ultimately people get a sense that they're wanting to be able to experience a quality of life. One is in terms of their health and well-being. The second one is in relationships, where they get to feel that they either belong to a loved one, to a family or community. The idea of security, so having a home or a secure place in which to be able to habitate. And then finally, the idea that I have something fulfilling or rewarding to contribute, that there's some way that I'm making a difference in the world. If people have those things, then once again, that's not an end in itself. It's a means to the ultimate end. And originally, and in the presentation, I talked about happiness as being the ultimate end. But what I realised when I thought about it is, for most people, if they have those things that we just talked about, which is about health and well-being, which is about loving relationships, a home, and a way in which to express themselves uniquely in the world, then people will be less exposed to suffering, and ultimately the desire is about being free of suffering. So at the end of the day, the success of a business is about quality of life and freedom from suffering for the people who own the business and the people who work for the business. They all have that same ultimate goal at the end of the day. Okay, but to achieve this in business, business requires 3 things. The first one is a product. And so, they've got to know that they've got something that people want. Secondly, there's got to be an organisation. Now, that organisation goes from the structure within a company in terms of the roles and the support and the things that exist, as well as the material resources in terms of the buildings, etc., internet, telephone, all that sort of thing. And then finally, the people. And of course, that's what we're focusing on today, is this whole idea of being able to create a sustainable workforce. Now, for people to be productive, and ultimately one of the things that is absolutely paramount in terms of the success of any organisation, but particularly a for-profit company, is that people are productive. They have the ability to really produce and basically work in such a way that they're giving a good return on investment for the people who own the business. There's 4 things that I have identified as being absolutely essential for that. And the first one is skills. And of course, what we know about skills is that skills are obtained through education or through experience. And so, people are remunerated based on their skill level. And the less skill, the less financial reward, the more skill, the more financial reward. The fact that people can turn up with health and well-being, and of course what we know from an EAP's perspective is that health and well-being is ultimately about the awareness that people have about self-loving choices, particularly around their states of who they are physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Being engaged is the third quality. So when we've got a situation where employees are engaged, that leads generally to higher productivity. And this is about suitable motivation, that there's actually a mechanism of motivation that has people want to be there, that has people want to participate in what they're doing. And finally, loyalty. And I like to think of loyalty as being what happens when people know that they're important, what happens when people are looked after or are cared for by a company. Now, in the big scheme of things, when it comes to skills, then that's something that people either get within the organisation or having gone to university or some form of training or other employment opportunities. Loyalty, once again, that tends to be something that the company is responsible for primarily. The other two, in terms of health and well-being and engagement, that's a little bit different, and that's where EAP steps in. In terms of health and well-being, what we're now talking about is who people are mentally, physically, and emotionally. Now, obviously, a company has a duty of care in terms of helping to make sure that people's mental, physical, and emotional health isn't being impacted on during the course of their employment. And I think that more than ever, there has been emphasis placed within the business world for that to be the case, that a company has a duty of care that they've got to be responsible for. But at the end of the day, the ultimate responsibility for maintaining somebody's health and well-being is the person themselves. And as a result of the work that we do in terms of the level of awareness that people have mentally, physically, and emotionally, what we know is that the less aware and the more ignorant people are around these things, the more susceptible that they are to sickness and to issues of poor health and well-being. And so one of the things that we're able to pitch, for example, to an organisation in this particular context is the whole notion that by helping people become more self-loving, and of course we do that by helping people identify their narrative and to see the impact that it has, but by helping people become more self-loving, then they're going to be more prone to make self-loving choices around their mental health, around physical health and well-being, and around emotional health and well-being. So we have a very key way of being able to make a significant impact on that in terms of people's experience. The next one is engagement, and I fit this underneath the aspect of spiritual. And of course, spiritual in the context of EAP, it's about what motivates us, it's what drives us. The majority of people have become engaged in their work when they can see how it serves themselves, serves others, and serves the planet. There are sustainable values that are a natural consequence of being committed to becoming more self-loving. In other words, finding the gift in one's story. So what happens is when people move to this place of being more self-loving, the focus shifts from meeting survival needs to how can I make a difference in the world? And certainly that capacity for people to be motivated by survival can actually drive people. But the ultimate motivation in terms of people's engagement within their employment situation is healthiest when it's been driven by a sense of how they can make a difference to themselves, to others, and to the planet. And once again, that's what it is that we bring. What we know is that when people are motivated by the need to survive, that leads to the burnout, that leads to compassion fatigue, that leads to depression, the sorts of things that lead to unsustainability in terms of people's health and well-being, in terms of how they turn up within an organisation.